Is this thing working? Are we live? I think we're live, provided the internet connection doesn't basically turn itself into smoke signals. What's happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic whatever day you're watching this. So, I recently put out a video, one of the standalone videos, and it's, what is this on my computer screen? And what it's more or less talking about are the stage cams. What does that mean? What do you mean by a stage 2? What do you mean by a stage 3? The thing is that it's not set in stone what stages mean. A stage 2 cam profile can look completely different for a small block, for example, than it would for a big block. And it may look completely different for an LS versus a Hemi. It's just, there's so much gray area just within engine families, much less when you're starting to talk about comparing one engine family to the next, old school versus new school. The specifications really start to morph, and what might be a stage 2 cam for one family of engines could end up being like a stage 1 for others. It just really depends on how everything shakes up. So anyway, I wanted to put that out there because I do get quite a few questions about cams. Guys asking me, is this cam right? What would you do in this situation? What would you spec out for this, etc. And I try to help folks out as much as I can without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, though. I mean, it's one of those things where you can only basically kind of put something together for somebody, but it's just kind of weird. A lot of times people just take those specs and call up so-and-so and say, hey, grind this for me, and never get a shout out for it. So there's that. So me putting out cam specs and helping folks out with cams is kind of a done deal now at this point. But all that being said, there are limits and there are levels to camshafts. And what I've tried to help out, or who I've tried to help out with that video, was kind of the novice, the guy that's just now getting into this whole hot rodding, building engines. What is a cam? Why is it important to me type of a thing? I know that in my experience, I've seen guys that have actually tried to go way too aggressive with a cam because they wanted the sound. And I get that, but with some of the modern engines, the problem is that, and this is really what I wanted to touch on too in that video, but it really wasn't like the video for this. And so anyway, if you're buying a cam based around sound, one of the issues that you can run into, aside from some potential tuning issues because of all the overlap with those tight lobe separation angles, but one of the issues you can run into is you get kind of a bucky cam. And what ends up happening is especially if you've got like a manual car, the thing just really wants to buck under partial throttle conditions. And so it can be a little bit annoying. It can be, it's like as if you had to, like, what's your favorite food? Like, let's say if you loved ice cream, it's like if you had to eat ice cream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, get sick of it within the span of probably a day or two. That's what living with one of the heavy lope cams is like. And if you're building an engine that is specific to a race application, that could possibly just come with the combination that you're putting together. But on the street, that stage 3, stage 4 in some cases, max effort cam can get tiresome really quickly, especially if it runs like crap under partial throttle, which is what a lot of them do. So checking in with you guys real quick. Eric's in. What's up, man? Ardell's in. What's up, Ardell? Eric's saying, what do you think about getting a custom H-pipe on a 392? I've heard it increases lower end torque, but how would you do that in the quarter mile compared to the stock X-pipe? So here's the thing. You can do it. It's not necessarily going to be better. Certain RPMs, it'll sound better for sure. I'm not a big fan of the X-pipe and how those can sound, especially if you go tearing out mufflers and things like that. They really do need to have resonators so that they're not as shrill as what some of the other options may be. But an H-pipe's always going to sound better. And Does it help with torque? I tell you what, I did a lot of exhaust testing. This is a long time ago. This is easily 10 years ago. Actually, about 12 or 13 years ago. I did a lot of 14 years ago. The time flies. Did a lot of exhaust testing. I did H pipe versus X pipe, straight pipe. I did chambered mufflers on an X and an H versus straight through mufflers on an X and an H. And the combination that made the most power was the H pipe with a straight through muffler. Now, that's not to say that's just the best and that's going to be the end of the discussion, because every combination is going to be a little bit different. But it made the best average power. Now, the X pipe usually made better bottom end torque than the H pipe did. And it would carry that torque. And when I say better, we're talking 3 or 4 numbers at the most. We're not talking about big time, big numbers here. So to say that one is better, it's a nominal reference to the word and to the result. It's not like it's wow better. But the H pipe really did make better, like legit better power at the higher RPM and at peak torque, where the X pipe would make better, I don't really want to call it average torque, but it made better lower end torque, and it would carry that lower end torque advantage just before peak torque. It would just kind of slide right underneath it and just have a little bit more of a tabletop, if that makes any sense. Anyway, but the H pipe would just power right past it. The thing is with X pipes, though, they hated chambered mufflers, like absolutely hated them. They had to have a wide open muffler to work properly. The H pipe really didn't care. It was cool with chambered mufflers and it was cool without them. So take that for whatever it's worth. But that was there's a lot of R&D that went into that testing. And man, it was, in fact, if you go on the channel, it's got to be one of the very first videos I ever posted was my old coupe on the dyno during exhaust testing. So I think it made a little over 300 horsepower to the rear wheels. So, but it was fun testing, that's for sure. Pretty neat stuff back in the day to be able to do that too. But anyway, getting back into the camshaft thing, I get a lot of the questions about the stage. What about a stage 2 cam, stage 3? And the thing is that you've got to pair the cam with the rest of the entire combination. You can't just throw together a combination like, oh, I've got cam at it and I've got exhaust on it. Well, yeah, but what about the rest of the combinations? Let me give you an example. One of the combinations that immediately comes to mind, and this was early on with the Gen 3, and I say Gen 3, it's the later Gen 3. So the Eagle 5.7 in this case, and Apache 6.4, but obviously Apache in that case. Anyway, you get the idea. One of the weird things about back then is Comp had come out with the Comp 268, 270, and 274 cam. The Comp 270 cam got a lot of love because it seemed to be a fairly decent performer for that engine at that time. The weird thing, though, is that nobody was really putting cams together for the Gen 3 Hemi. At least you didn't really hear too much about it. And the aftermarket just didn't really support the Gen 3 Hemi in that respect. So anyway, the Comp 270, I drove a car with a Comp 270, and it just felt soft. It felt like something was wrong with it. Anyway, that was a 6.4 with a Comp 270. And heck, my stock cam 392 felt like it would walk all over that Comp 270 cam. Now, thing is that the Comp 270 did make more power way to the right on the power on the dyno. I think it made like an extra 20 horsepower over my car, but dang, if you wouldn't have ever felt it, it just felt dead down low. And yeah, it pulled strong, I guess, up top. But by the time you got the car up into that power band, it was just kind of you kind of already noticed the difference and it wasn't favorable. And it's not like the car just came alive. not with the Comp 270. One of the more interesting cars, though, that I drove was a 5.7 with the Comp 274. And the 274 was an interesting cam because it had a significantly wide lobe separation angle. I think it was like 116 or something like that. A lot of lift, a lot of duration. Anyway, that car, you could flat foot that car and it wouldn't spin the tires. And it's not like it would just pin you back. It would take off and you would go, 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 go. And it would just keep accelerating. But it was always kind of a bit of a mismatch. Anyway, that's what got us started in putting our own cams together over at Pites, is that it was pretty apparent that the aftermarket camshafts just really weren't all that great. And of course, it was pretty simple for us to talk about cams in these terms because you can do that when you've got all the tuning experience in the world and a loaded dyno at your disposal. So anyway, that's where some of the later camshafts really came from, was the fact that we were noticing that what was initially released just wasn't all that great. And come to find out later on, those same cams that I'm kind of speaking down upon, well, those cams end up being fantastic if you're running a boosted application. And in that case, those cams end up working really well. So there's that, at least, especially that Comp 274, good boosted cam for the Hemis, but not so much for NA, at least not unless you had a lot of compression. So anyway, when it gets into those stage kits, a lot of guys are expecting, well, all I have to do is put a cam in the car and the magic will happen behind a keyboard, right? And then the car is just going to be super fast. That's not always the case. And in fact, more often than not, a lot of guys were reasonably disappointed with some of those cams early on. And a lot of the times it's just because they had picked a cam that was way too big. And quite frankly, big cams in cars with cylinder heads that flow like crazy, well, the problem with that is that they're just dogs down low and they're absolutely no fun to drive. And man, to be honest with you, it ends up being very, you kind of wonder if you got ripped off is the way that you'd end up feeling. So what we would always say is err on the side of caution, err on the side of small when it comes to the Hemis. The LSs, you could always get away with more camshaft. A few reasons. One, the cars are just lighter. But in general, the LS cams were typically a more traditionally sized cam. You would see 224, 230 was a common one, 228, 232, 228, 234. You would also get into like 236, 240 for some of the more aggressive LS3 builds, 240, 246 for some of the real aggressive ones. So, but the thing about it is that those guys, I mean, you really weren't looking for any kind of bottom end torque. Almost all of those cars were manual transmission cars. Almost all of those cars had some kind of a gear in them, which is kind of the other side of the conversation, just the extra gear to help the thing move along. So it's one of those situations where, the LS architecture, you'd typically end up running like a mid 230 and a low 240 cam in those things, just because it was more appropriate for the package that it was going into. Whereas that same profile of a cam in a Hemi, yeah, it would pick up horsepower, but the problem is it would be at the expense of torque that you needed to get the car going. Then it's okay, well, what kind of torque converter can we get? And then they're kind of mushy. And then by the time it's all said and done, I mean, you had a weight penalty with a Mopar, and you're ended up spending a whole lot of money on parts just to get the car to kind of act like you think it's supposed to act. And anyway, it ends up being kind of it's just an odd taste when you're messing with the Mopars, when you try to go too big with the cams. Yeah, there's power to be found, but you end up losing out on a lot of drivability just in the loss of torque. So And the fact that there just wasn't a high RPM manifold to go along with the Hemis up until somewhat recently, unless you went with like a Hogan sheet metal style intake, which is kind of what everybody ended up going to with some of the high Rams or the Snipers and things like that. So, but when you did that, then you could really take advantage of the benefits of having a bigger cam in the car, because again, the stock intake manifolds weren't really good for the big cams anyway. And then you can really start running those things out. But again, you're giving up so much torque. You need to go with a different torque converter to keep it from surging at lights. If you're on the street, probably would want to re-gear it. And that ends up opening up another host of issues. So it's one of those things where you've got to know where to stop. And most guys will go ahead and hit the brakes somewhere around the stage 2, or somewhere in the stage 2 range. If you start trying to go any further than that, again, you're going to run into everything that I was just talking about before with all the problems that you're potentially going to hit. Plus, I can almost guarantee you that once you put a cam that big into one of those cars, that you're going to be probably 12 months at the long end, maybe 14 to 16 if you're just a diehard, of hanging on to that car. You're probably going to sell it because it just starts to get a little bit old. The stage 2 guys might keep their car for quite a bit longer. Now, when we start talking about stage 1, good evening, Chuck. The problem with the stage 1 is that there's not enough cam in a stage 1 to really do anything in terms of making power. I mean, yeah, it's going to make more power. Like in the LS is what we would consider a stage 1, because LSs are so under cammed. You would be looking at probably a 30 to 40 horsepower jump in some of those small stage 1 cams. You know, guys with the Hemis go, why don't we get that much? Well, it's because the Hemi cams are a lot more aggressive than the stock Chevrolet cams. That's why throwing a cam in a Hemi, you don't get the big increases, or at least as big as putting a cam in an LS, again, because the LS cams are small by comparison. So getting back into it, for the LS crowd, it might be a little bit different, Hemi crowd too, but for a lot of guys to go from what would be like a 218, 224, 218, 230 cam, something like that, to go from that cam to a big stage 2, which would be like a 226, 230 cam, the big takeaway from it would be they would probably come back and go, man, the partial throttle response just isn't there. You've got to do a lot of creative tuning with the stage 2 to get it to act like a stock cam or a stage 1. And again, there's going to be a lot of compromises, but there's also going to be a lot of power to be gained with the stage 2. You just have to spend the time with a lot of the throttle settings, and you got to spend a lot of time to get that stage 2 to act a little bit better so that it doesn't feel like such a dog down low. Sovereign's asking, how about that internal forged 6? Well, all of them actually have forged internals. But I know which one you're talking about, the crate 6-cylinder. Yeah, it works out pretty good. Should be fun. Nick's asking, cam or turbo in a 5.7? Why not both? The thing is that, okay, so turbo in a 5.7, if you go with, what is it? I think Helion makes a pretty decent kit now for the 5.7s. If it were my car, I would go stock cam turbo and let it ride. And the reason why I say that is, why dig into the engine if you don't have to? You can make 130 horsepower over stock with either the turbo or with a Procharger, and you don't lose any of the drivability. Now, there's plenty of cams out there for a 5.7 that you won't lose drivability, but It's one of the guys in the Mustangs just rolled by. So we're real close to Velocito here. So it's a warm night, but it's clear. So you might hear a little bit more of that heading out. So anyway, getting back to it. It depends on what your goals are for the car. If it's mine, I would want to put something on an NA car that I can take off and sell on. If you ever want to get rid of the car, you decide you want something else, or your life situation just dictates that you got to get rid of it. It's a lot easier to take something off, sell the car more or less as stock, get rid of the kit, and move on than it is to try to explain that you've got a cammed 5.7, because camshafts, a lot of people, I mean, it's a subjective thing, but a lot of people aren't big fans of cammed cars that they're going to be driving around on the street. Again, it just depends on the cam that's in it. So for me, that's my own personal opinion. Now, what cam would I put in a 5.7? I mean, all of the 5.7, 6.4 variants love 218, 220, 222-ish on the intake side. You're going to want to be over 220, though, for a 6.4. And somewhere around 230, 232 on the exhaust side. They love that combination. So somewhere around in there, that would be perfect. But again, it just depends on what your particular budget will allow. But again, for me, I just go boost with stock and call it a day. I mean, you might pick up 40 horsepower with a cam. You're guaranteed to pick up about 130 horsepower with forced induction. Summer saying, hit that like button. Also, too, the turbo kit. Thank you, Summer. The turbo option is going to be pretty expensive. If I've got a 5.7, I would probably try to cheat the system and go with like an E-Force just to pick up on the torque. Oh, Darren saying he's pro-charged M6 and looking at this cam, XA224. Let's see, 224, 238. On a 118 LSA plus 4 on the intake side. So you're installed at 114. That's going to rock that thing back quite a bit. I'm assuming you've got an Eagle 5.7. Am I guessing that right? I don't know what engine you're talking about. Probably not the route that I would go necessarily. Probably, yeah, your 5.7. I would look at, I mean, if you're looking out for something right off the shelf for a pro-charged application, I'd look at a Comp 270. Even a Comp 268 would be, well, I don't know. They're going to be rocked back a little bit too. It really doesn't. If you're pro-charged, here's the problem you're going to run into if you're pro-charged. Any of the pro-charged cars are going to want to keep making power the more you rev them. And so putting a cam in the car on a 118, the problem with that, a 118 grind cam is a positive displacement supercharger cam, for one thing. Let's just get that out of the way. The wider the LSA, the more the cam is going to want to favor high RPM. And unless you're willing to spin this thing to about 7,300, 7,500 RPM, which I don't recommend, I don't know that cam would necessarily be the right one for you. Again, if you've got the intake manifold to go with it, though, and all of that, maybe it works out. But I would prefer to see something around 114 degree LSA on a 110. So so like a 114 plus 4, 224, 238 is what it looks like it's speccing out at 70. I don't necessarily have a big problem with that. It's favoring the exhaust side, which is what a lot of guys like to do. I would probably drag that down to like 220, 236, somewhere right around in that range. But I would want to probably drag it back the other direction just a little bit. Again, the 118 is what throws me off because you're pro-charged. Now, if you had an E-Force, I'd be like, yeah, go for it. That's going to be a great blower. I just would not go that way. Nick's saying nowadays the Rams have the VVT. Yep, they've had it since what, 2012, I think. Mark's saying, Raging Bull's asking, why are push rods required when doing a cam swap on a Hemi? A couple of reasons. For one, you want to keep from bending a push rod. It's to keep from bending a push rod at higher RPM. Higher lift on aftermarket springs means a lot more load, not only on it's the entire load of the valve train. So the connection from the rocker to the lifter is the push rod. And typically that's going to be the thing that fails first when you try to start spinning higher RPM. You got to remember that the Hemi's got a fairly large intake valve, which is weight. That's inertia that you have to overcome when you're running high RPM. The valve train geometry is not exactly optimal in a Hemi, and so that adds load to the valve train in general. And that's talking load from the camshaft to the rocker. That's going to have to absorb that. The lifter isn't going to be what fails. It's going to be the push rod typically. So that's why 080 is the wall thickness you want to look at. Let's see. Mark saying I started looking into cams again after watching your video. Ideally, you'd get a blower cam just because I plan on supercharging down the line. You can. There's two different schools of thought, though, when you talk about a blower cam. A wide lobe separation angle with a rocked back intake center line, which is like what we were looking at here. That's 114 degree LSA on that cam, 118 plus 4. That is a positive displacement supercharger cam. If you were to look at like an LSA cam, it looks a lot like an LSA cam, as a matter of fact, from GM. And what it's trying to do is that wide lobe separation angle is trying to make that positive displacement supercharger keep making power at higher RPM, and the wide LSA makes the intake runner extremely active, so that creates a lot of boost response immediately down low. The grinder of the cam, the guy putting the cam together is looking at that going, okay, I don't need to rely on the atmosphere or cylinder scavenging to make power down low. That's what I've got this big supercharger sitting on top of the engine for. I'm going to do everything I can to make this engine make power up top. And what it does, it makes a very flat, very broad power band. That's what you want with a positive displacement supercharger. With a ProCharger, it's a little bit different story. You cheat the other direction. In fact, you would be forgiven if you were to take a look at a ProCharger, like somebody that's doing a dedicated ProCharger build. That is going to be a rowdy cam. It's going to have a lot of overlap. It's going to be fairly advanced in terms of where the intake center line is. Not uncommon to see 107, 108 in those instances. It looks like a pretty aggressive NA cam. And the idea here is you're trying to make mid-range power, and you're forcing that ProCharger to drag your power further out on the right side of the chart, so to speak. So whenever I would put together cams for guys with ProChargers, I had to kind of quell what I was doing with that lobe separation angle, because I'm trying to go in at like 110, 108 degrees. Well, that ain't going to work with these Hemis on the street, but preferably that's where I would be. And I would have this thing be super rowdy, make a ton of mid-range power, and then just use that ProCharger to drag the power out on the big end. Now, that's kind of an extreme example, but I think that kind of helps to illustrate the difference between the two different blower cams, because they can be completely different. Donnie's asking about Hellcat cams. Don't really recommend them unless you're planning on going big boost with different fuel. It's just not worth it. You got too many people out there running mid to low nines with the stock cam with 2.4 liter superchargers. I think one thing first is talking about, damn, that's a huge split. So a lot of the blower cams, it's not uncommon to see a 10-degree split between the two. Talking about like 220, 230. Oh, in fact, you might see 14. It used to be real common, and it still is. for some of the higher horsepower, higher, little bit twitchier race applications to see, like 14 degrees from intake to the exhaust side. And what you're doing is you're dumping cylinder pressure, excess cylinder pressure as fast as you can, cracking the valve open as early as you are. Someone's talking about, I heard what the artificial engine sounds like on the Mach-E. I know it's fake, but it sounds okay. I think I'd rather have the newer sound the Banshee makes. I think I'd rather have the engine actually mic'd up and run through an amp with a distortion pedal. You can make it sound like whatever you want. That'd be really cool. Oh yeah, it's from Borla. So yeah, there's going to be some changes there. Andy's in saying, "Good evening, Brian. What's up? Got the flex. I like it." Jeremy's talking about some blasphemy over here. Went to an all Mopar show and saw a 70 Satellite with a 5.0 Coyote. Gad. Now I've seen everything. He says 118 plus 4 of advance at TDC. Yeah, the wider LSA with bigger duration at 50 will help build cylinder pressure to help with the idle. And with a wider, well, here's the thing. So 118, I mean, you're cracking the exhaust way early, closing it early. And so your DCR, dynamic compression ratio, is just higher with it. It's not a ton, I mean, but it is enough to really skew the numbers. So, again, 118 with a +4 puts you in an intake center line of 114. There is no reason under the sun why I would ever want a 114, unless it's part of a VVT, which is where you're rocking the thing back, and at high RPM you end up at a 114 with the intake center line. It's just that is a lot of retard in a cam, just for anybody's purposes. So, but if you've got a positive displacement supercharger, then it ends up working out great, because again, your intake runners are extremely active, and it makes immediate boost response just like that. Oh, Think First saying, yeah, I thought you said 218, 240. Oh, no. That would be, no, that wouldn't work very well. I mean, you'd see 226, 240, but not a 218. About the most on the back end of a 218 that you would see would be 230. Really. I mean, it's too much of a ratio between what you're bringing in and putting out. You just wouldn't need it. Now, and I can't think of an engine that would do well with anything that big. It's way too much exhaust. It's just not an appropriate split, in my opinion. But I've seen a ton of cams come over that were, 223, 242. I have seen those, and those actually aren't half bad if you're running like a pump gas scenario. But you get all kinds of stuff. The funny thing is there's not a whole lot of, with the later cams, with the newer load profiles, I don't know, they all weren't all that bad. Like I say, I would prefer to see something along the lines of, for something like that, that type of a program, again, like a 223 at the most for a 5.7, 223, 238 would be actually really good in that car. Evan's asking, can you run lighter wheels on the back with stickier tires and keep the stock wheels and tires up front, even if they're heavier? Yes, we do it all the time for both drag days and to get better traction on the street for fun. Sure, you can. The main thing is to make sure you're running, radials on the rear. Don't run bias plies. You can leave your stocks up front. That's not a problem. In fact, the stocks in the quarter versus skinnies, there's about a 0.5 tenth difference there. So a lot of guys run their factory fronts just because, number one, they don't want to buy the skinnies, or two, they don't want to go through the hassle of swapping things out, whatever the case is. But as long as you're running radials in the back, you should be fine. Evan's saying, scavenging the heat. What are you saying? Hold on. Scavenging the heat and cylinder pressure with a lot of boost. You want to hold open the exhaust valve longer. Yeah, kind of. I mean, the idea is to dump cylinder pressure as quickly as you possibly can, regardless of whether it's boosted or not. But again, you want to dump that pressure in an appropriate way for the combination. So anyway, without getting too, that can be a rabbit hole that you end up diving into. Yeah, I mean, the idea is to get rid of as much cylinder or as much exhaust mass as you can. Remember that the engine has to draw in air or power a compressor to bring air in. But when the exhaust valve opens up, it's still under a lot of pressure. So you have pressure forcing that thing out before it hits bottom dead center. You've got a ton of cylinder decay, pressure decay as the cylinder drops, is what I meant to say. And as that pressure decays, you get to a certain point as that piston is coming down in the cylinder. And this varies for every car depending on the application. But at some point, it is counterproductive to not open the exhaust valve. Even though you still have a lot of pressure on top of the cylinder, you think, okay, you're just going to keep driving it down. You need the pressure to evacuate the mass so that you can bring more air into it. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Let's see, the original, the Z06, the 427, yeah, the LS7, 221, 600. LSA was 121. Yeah, that they did have a wide LSA on that thing, and that was to make the thing a little bit easier to tune. Those heads on an LS7 flow about 350 CFM. They are really, really good cylinder heads. So yeah, things saying he loves the camshaft stuff. Yep. Yeah, I've been messing with camshafts for these Gen 3 Hemis for so long now. I mean, you can almost rattle off specs off the top of your head. Oh, he's talking about the big block Chevys. So I don't know what the deal is lately with guys with speakers on the outsides of their car. Anyway, talking about the big block Chevys, 265, 290, 750 lift. Yeah, that's pretty common for some of the big blocks that were pretty healthy builds. 116 with an F1. Cam's probably installed on about 112 intake centerline. Running 13.5 to 1 compression. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Okay, so into that 13.5 to 1 compression point, been getting a lot of questions from guys about E85 lately. And this is kind of weird for me. And the only reason why it's not weird, it's cool. I'm actually really happy because I've been hoping that somebody may take over the reins with E85 tuning for the NA guys and really start running with it and maybe do some, I'd love to see somebody do a dedicated E85 build. But I've been getting a lot of questions about E85, timing questions, what type of setups, camshafts for E85, just different combination questions about it, which is cool, but it's also weird. And so when I was working for Pikes, we had a few E85 cars and a lot of remote tuning cars that were E85. I would clean up trans tunes and things like that. And I would also run the cars on the dyno, do power sweeps with them, try to figure out, okay, does it like 18 degrees of timing? Does it like 20 degrees of timing? What about 22? What about 25? and I would do these power sweeps with the car on the loaded dyno. It's on a Mustang dyno, the eddy current dyno. And it didn't matter really all that much what cam was in it, stock cam, whatever. We just never, I couldn't do a power sweep on the car and have it make more power by just throwing timing at it. But this was also before this was right as the Victor intake was coming out. So the Vic was just hitting the streets. This was before there were any like sniper or high ram intakes for the NA guys. And so there was a lot to unpack with this. There was also a lot of guys not doing dedicated builds. And one of the things that we were talking about at the time was, well, I mean, is there a way to get one of these cars, put a different set of pistons in it with fly cuts, have it around, I don't know, 13.5 to 15 to 1 compression. My argument was 15. And put just a cam it, whatever, 224, 230 cam. It didn't really matter. But do a true E85 build. And the problem is nobody really wanted to do that for a few reasons. One was, regardless of what power you could make with it, E85 was a pain to get your hands on. The second problem, and this is probably more to the point when it came to E85, was the quality of E85 was a little bit suspect. And I mean, about a handful of times, I would have a car that had a bad tank of E85. Happened to a buddy of mine's car twice. And it was a legit problem. Like, it screwed up a track rental for him. You get the idea. So, it's one of those weird things where, you're just going, ugh. So the range issue was a big problem for guys. And the boosted guys didn't have a problem because they didn't really care. But the NA guys had a bit more of an issue because, I mean, you're asking an NA combination to act like a boosted car. That's why you have to have the extra compression. And it would actually give it more of a traditional, or I say traditional, it would just kind of give it what you would consider to be a normal timing portfolio anyway. And in other words, what the tables would look like would be something that you would be used to seeing. But even then, I mean, I had Quick Brick, his car, oh my God, that thing was on the dyno for like 2 or 3 days. And it was just one of those things where, as I had time to mess with it, I would get in the car, fire it up, warm it up, make sure all the temperatures were identical. And I would put together 3 or 4 different tunes. This one's going to command 17 degrees. It's way low. 18 degrees, 20, 24, 22, 20. And it just tried to get that thing just perfect. And finally got it there. But the thing just did not want to make power at high timing value. So anyway, I guess the point of all of this is y'all get out there and do something cool. Let me know what y'all are up to. Think first saying they were running high compression, and then intake center line, around 112. Yep. Captain Boo's saying, how's it going, 9B? What's up, Cap? Commented on the other video, but I think I'll go with the Arrington SD3A for my manual 6.1, 225, 234, 592 intake, 594 exhaust, 114 LSA. Good cam for the 6.1. I see nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I like the 114 LSA with the intake manifold that you've got. 225, 234 is right there in the middle of that wheelhouse. So good deal. 592, 594 is appropriate lift for that cam. Or for that application. So that's good. Your heads don't flow much more CFM any higher than that lift value anyway. So there's no reason to go that high, or any higher than that. Think first, I think is talking about E85. Well, it's a slower burning fuel, but you have more fuel mass in the cylinder. And so what you wind up with is, if the engine is not, like, let's say, for example, you're running, okay, let's do octane for octane. Let's say, and for that matter, let's do oxygenated. Let's do MS 109. MS-109 versus E85, or you can even dumb it down a little bit and say Sunoco GT260 or 260 GT260 plus, which is about 104 octane. 260 is 100. The 104 has 13% ethanol in it. 260 has 10%. But the point of this is that you will have more fuel mass with the E85, but up to a certain point, that fuel mass can end up taking up and displacing oxygen. So you have more fuel mass, the combustion process takes place more quickly. The handshake from one oxygenating event to the next is a shorter distance. What ends up happening is a lot of times you end up with the same timing values notwithstanding between the two different fuels. Let's see. Thank you for saying, everybody hit the like button. Yes, please hit the like button, share, hit that bell. It all helps me out a ton, guys, with all the things that you got to do for like YouTube vibes or whatever. All of that stuff helps. So appreciate anything, really. I do. Jeremy's saying, Jeremy's saying, planning to run the 228, 238 around 550 or 580 lift, 112 Holly Sniper intake, Pro Charger on the 5.7, running an Eagle M6. Okay. Yeah, that'd be fine. 228, 238 works great. 550 is a little bit shy on lift. I would think that you would probably want to be around that 570, 580 range. 112 is that where for the lobe separation angle? You could actually do 112 and just installed straight up with an intake center line on 112. That would actually drag power pretty far out, but you'd be peaky. It would be kind of peaky. So it's like taking mid-range and moving mid-range out a little bit. Since it's an M6, you could probably get away with it. So I'm saying bad EA5 is corrupt corn. Indeed it is. I think first, actually it's 30%, but you are correct. It's quite a bit more fuel mass. And I say that, E90 is closer to like 32, 33%. It's a lot more fuel mass, a lot more than what most people think. And it's the big issue with E85 is just range anxiety for me, aside from the corrosiveness of that stuff. Although modern fuel systems, you don't have to worry about it too much, but it can be a bit of a problem. I think we were saying just had his 427 Windsor built with a Dart SHP block with billet main caps, 351. Got Molnar forged crank, forged rods, wide-scope pistons. It sounds a lot like my old 427. I had twisted wedge street heats on mine with a T-trim at about 10 pounds of boost. 248, 256, 640, 640 on a 113. That'll be a fun street grind. That'll be a fun cam for that particular application for sure. If they have street car, yep, exactly. That'd be 100% street grind. That is not that far off actually from what I ran in mine. The 351. Yep. I think first got the flag. I like it. Rageable asking, what duration for a 5.7 with a 4050 stroke? What depends. I mean, is this a street car? I would still stick with what works. I mean, a 4050, it's a 392 stroker. It's basically a square. At that point, it's not square because the 4050 is a little bit more than the bore, but it's as close as it really doesn't matter. I mean, if it's a street grind, I would still stick around that 226 range, 222, right around in that range would be about where you'd want to be on the street. Intake center line on that one, probably around 110, give or take. I think first, I was told 40. Yeah, on the tuning side, we always manage it at 30%. I don't know that canola is actually made out of corn there, Sovereign, but I get what you're saying. I think for saying, thanks, B. Mason, you rock. Didn't know. Yeah. So that car gave a lot of people a lot of fits. It was the 351, 420. Actually, it was built by Kuntz and Company. This is before it was Kuntz, but Kuntz and Company 427 street heats, similar grind cam to that. And it went through a number of different intake manifolds. I had a Sniper on it, which was the Victor converted to fuel injection. It had a Super Victor converted to fuel injection on that thing. Ran a throttle body style, carburetor style throttle body for a while. Had the elbow though, primarily with a 90 millimeter throttle body. Long tubes. I mean, T-trim, Aeromotive 1000 pump. I mean, it was some tank. It was an old school. Anyway, gave a lot of people a lot of headaches, and that car won a lot of races. It was a manual car too, TKO. It with 323 gears, it would absolutely pull 5,500 RPM in fifth gear. Do the math. So anyway, the problem with that car though is that it just ate itself alive, and ended up getting rid of that car and getting my first Viper. Rage Bull saying it's going into a 71 Duster with a stick. Yeah, in that case, fun combination. Again, stick with the recipe. 220, mid to low 220s, around 230 on the exhaust side. 232 really on the exhaust side. If you want it to be a bit more spicy, yeah, you could go like 228, 232 and just bring it down to like a 113 lobe separation angle, something along those lines. Intake center line probably around 108, give or take. Make it kind of peaky, kind of perky at around mid-range. Be a lot of fun. Jeremy's saying here in Florida, there is way too much variance and not a lot of E85 to run all the time. I love these guys running around with 5-gallon cans in their cars. Oh, yeah. So, but that's how you got to do it, man. I mean, it's no joke. You'll see a lot of the guys kicking around with old, I use them as trash cans, but with the old Sunoco cans. You'll see a lot of those guys running around, and they'll just you'll see them at the track, guys getting rid of them, and I cut them apart, use them as trash cans, and they would use them as E85 cans. Don't know why. Never did ask, but I did see it quite a bit. Saw a lot of guys doing it too. But I get, well, usually they're free. Most of the guys just toss them. But the camshaft stuff's kind of fun for me. It's always weird hearing guys with what they've run in the past and what their experience was with the different camshafts that they may have been running. And but again, what used to always kind of get to me was that when you start taking it seriously, and this is something that I didn't really mention in that video. I don't know if it was really worth mentioning at the time, but if you're planning on putting a cam in one of these Hemis, I would caution you on it only in that do not err on the side of bigger is better. Err on the side of caution. Get smaller in this case is going to be. I literally just got a notification that I'm on. Good job. Only an hour in. But I guess the idea is err on the side of smaller is better, because what you end up running into is a mismatch. And the problem with the mismatch is almost always in the intake manifold. There's only so much. The intake manifold is engineered and designed to make peak power in one spot and peak torque in another. When you go messing with camshafts, a lot of guys think, oh, well, you're just overtaxing the intake manifold. It's actually the other way around, and this is where guys get it completely wrong. The more overlap you have with a tight lobe separation angle or a tighter lobe separation angle, the less work the intake tract has to do. If the intake tract doesn't have to do as much work because you have more overlap, less activity on the intake side, what ends up happening is that intake manifold kind of starts to act like it's bigger than what it really is. And the issue is that you lose the stacking effect at certain RPMs on the intake side. So perfect example of that is 5.7s with their fixed intake manifold. If you put too big of a cam in that thing, by the time the cam starts to get somebody's doing burnouts for distance right down the street. I don't know if y'all could hear that. By the time the cam starts trying to become efficient, the intake manifold, because of wave tuning, could have already been efficient or is not going to be efficient when the cam is trying to make peak torque. And so that's why when you go real big with a cam, you got to go with a different intake manifold, because your stock intake manifold is going to be such a mismatch from intake and pulse tuning. You just need to go with something with small runners and allow the thing to make the power up top where the cam is trying to make power anyway. Sorry, saying no. We can say, hey, boss, is a stage 2 cam full bolt-on Challenger as reliable as a 392 stock in the long run, 2015, 2020? Yeah. I mean, no reason why it won't be. But again, it depends on how nutty you got with the camshaft. And of course, how often are you changing the oil? How often are you beating on the car? But if you go with a small cam, 220, 230, style cam on a 114, one of the more like a normal stage 2, like if you were to just blindly go through a book, HRT cam from Comp, for example. They're doing laps back there. Surprised they haven't come by and honk. A lot of times when they see the light on and it's Saturday night, they'll stop by and honk. But if you stick with that, and again, stick to the recipe, especially when it comes to the Mopars, you can easily get too big, but you know, something like a 223, 232, something along those lines, a generic stage 2, like what you would see typically show up in the books, a decent set of valve springs, a new set of lifters, and a set of 080 push rods. It's no different in terms of reliability than the stock cam. Some will argue this is kind of a like if it's just me and you talking, just us bald guys talking, right? What it is that the stock cam has got a goofy looking, by comparison, lobe. It's got a lot of lift, but not a lot of duration. Stock cam for the 392, for example, is only 215, if I remember correct, duration, but it's 577 lift. So yeah, there's that. So that actually has a pretty hard hit on. Now it's a little bit, the ramp portion of the lobe's a little bit soft, but you get the idea. There's a lot of action happening in terms of lift in a lot shorter duration. So it's again, a little bit more duration, a little bit tighter lobe separation angle, not going to hurt anything in terms of longevity. Just take care of the car. It'll take care of you. We didn't say, love your videos. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I can't say, man, smoking them. Yeah, somebody's out there having fun. You roast them if you got them. Hell yeah. Red Dog's asking if I have any experience with a Torque Storm Supercharger. It's a little easier on the wallet. They're all good at that point. The way I look at the Torque Storm, do you got any of you guys, old school guys, the BD11, If what I just said makes any sense to some of you guys out there, you're going to go, oh shit. And you'll know if you're out there, I can already hear the keyboard lighting up. The BD11 Powerdyne Supercharger was internally belt driven. It didn't have a step down transmission the way that the normal superchargers would. Anyway, really cool supercharger. And the only reason why it didn't stay in business, or it didn't have the pub that it really should have, is because everybody's a size queen when it comes to horsepower numbers. But for the street, I loved the BD11. I never put one on my 427. I did have one on my 302. And what I loved about it was that the impeller design was more aggressive than an S trim or even an A trim. It was just a much more aggressive centrifugal supercharger. It was designed to really only make about 10 pounds of boost on an engine that with a cam had maybe 5 to 5.5 liters at the most. But it was a fantastic street blower. That's a lot like what this Torque Storm is. And so they're really good. Absolutely nothing wrong with them. My understanding is that they have a more aggressive impeller design, a lot like the old Powerdyne blowers. From my understanding, the guys that have them love them. They're fantastic on the street. You can make plenty of power with them. I think that the walking around Torque Storm is good for about 750 horsepower, which is far and away more than what some of the other ones were later on. So, back in the day. So yeah, they're great. I wouldn't have any issues with them whatsoever. And they're going to tune out just like any other supercharger would. So no difference there. Captain Boo saying, I picked up another Challenger. Nice. Bare shell over the summer. The plan is to put an 8/8 solid axle in it, 4 lengths, similar to the drag pack, probably a mild Eagle. Would you happen to know anyone who has solid axled theirs? No, not solid axle. Do I know anybody? Man, no. I have to say no because I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. Now, I do know of a few people that have done the 9-inch swap setup, and I don't think that went over all that well for those guys. Did Z? No, I don't think Z solid axle his car either. I would stick with the drag pack setup though. I think it'd be okay with that, but I just off the top of my head, man, I'm sorry, I just don't know of anybody that's solid axled their car. And the reason why nobody has solid axled their cars again is because the stock stuff has been carrying people deep into the 8s, and it's just kind of a thing with guys right now. And in fact, and that's stock diffs too. So I don't know. I know that there's been, and the other thing is this, most of the time guys will stop at a power level that would get you into the mid 9s. So 1,000 horsepower, give or take. That's about the number at the flywheel, somewhere between 800 and 900 horsepower to the rear wheels, depending on the dyno and the time of day and the stars alignment and planets, whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. The main thing is, once you get to that number, the stock stuff is still great. It'll still make you run a number, and it's already there. So, Cap said, this car will eventually be body swapped to a retro charger. Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I'm planning on a solid axle. Man, I mean, like I say, I just don't know of anybody that's done the swap. I mean, like I say, everybody's covering a number with less right now. So, or with stock and not the aftermarket. And they were breaking the 9 inches, if you can imagine that. And the ZF diff was holding together. Cal says, was the early version of the drag pack, the 426 or the Viper engine or both? It was actually both. They had the aluminum 426 and they had the Viper engine variant, which was kind of a weird deal, but kind of cool too. But yeah, there was both of them available. And then later on, they went to the Supercharged 354. Still have the 426. And then there was some dude you could buy the 426 as a crate motor. You may still be able to do it. I haven't really paid attention to it in a long time, but I know some dude at a 4x4 shop bought up a bunch of the aluminum 426s and were using them for Jeep swaps, which was pretty sweet. But yeah, I think at one point we're trying to find one. I'm like, yeah, finding these aluminum, the Halo engine, the aluminum 426, and we're going, why? So it's funny. Every once in a while, you'd have somebody come by going, man, I really want that aluminum 426, and we're going, no, you don't. Oh, you super don't. You like really, really, really don't. Although you could build a hell of a drag engine out of the thing, but everybody just went with the cast iron blocks because they were so much more rigid. Jeremy went to the Don Garson Museum. We had one of the original drag packs with Viper motor. It's definitely a curio, no doubt about it. Curiosity in that. But I never drove one of those. I always kind of wanted to drive one of those cars, but too busy playing around in the shallow end, this stock boost stuff. And I say that, I mean, it's not really true. I mean, there for a while, being in the middle. The thing is when you're in the middle of all of this stuff, what's funny is just how, I don't want to say jaded, because that's probably not the right word, but it's easy to get really used to big horsepower number combinations. And so there kind of comes a time, like one of the biggest questions, or in terms of number of like having the same question, like one of the popular questions, biggest question. Wow. One of the more popular questions was, how much boost is safe on a Hellcat on 93 octane? How much boost is safe on a Hellcat on 91 octane for the guys that were in other states? How much power can I get out of a cam? Why don't Hemis make more power than they do when you put a cam in them? And I get those are kind of the big ones, right? How much would it cost to put a 426 together? Those were kind of the more popular questions. And it was interesting because by the time it was all said and done, pretty much everybody, you could almost hear the wind taken out of their sails. It was like, how much power can you make? The Hellcat one was probably the most popular because we had a lot of Hellcats come through that shop, and everybody wanted to make more and more power. The car had really only been out for a few years at that point, and so its popularity was really on an upsurge. There wasn't anything in still really not, but there wasn't anything from any other manufacturer that would run with that car, especially on a drag strip, if you were pulleyed. And this is before even HP tuners had any transmission tuning availability. So it was just kind of interesting at that point in time. But the big question was always, what's the smallest pulley I can run and still run 93 or 91 octane? And our first answer is stock. Don't try to get away with anything. Anyway, but the other one was, the other question was, why is the 392 like with glass pistons and all this other stuff? And we're like, no, that's not the case. But where a lot of that came from was just the fact that early on, a lot of folks didn't quite understand. They didn't speak Mopar. They didn't speak Mopar at all. And so you had guys with years of LS experience trying to tune a Mopar, and it didn't really work out very well because Mopar timing tables are going to show a lot lower number than one for an LS. I'm still of the opinion that the timing tables that you see when you're tuning those things, there's like a built-in 10 degrees already in there. It's almost how you have to think about it, because it'll kind of screw with your head a little bit, but you almost have to think of like the base set timing is at 10, and then everything else is just a timing advanced number above the 10. So that's kind of how I always had to think about it, because the numbers are really low. So I'm saying, thanks y'all for hitting that like button. Absolutely appreciate y'all hitting that like button for sure, guys. So anyway, I guess the point that I'm getting to with that is it's a little bit easy to get jaded too, because after a while, you see the same combinations roll through. They're all making the same power, but it's not the same combinations. It's the fact that you've had combinations similar to that car, and you try to load a tune into it and it doesn't reproduce the number that the other car did. It could be more or less. Mopars were always weird. I used to joke, as a matter of fact, that Mopars are the ultimate snowflake, in that every one of them seemed to be different. And what I meant by that was that you could load the exact same tune into a car that rolled nose to tail out of the plant that they're made in, right out of the factory. and the tune that worked great in the first car would not work as well in the second car. It was just always a little bit weird. There's running line changes, operating system changes, and things like that, that cam phasing changes that would make the timing value either more or less appropriate, more or less correct, I guess would be the right way to put it. So you couldn't just go, oh yeah, we'll just give you this tune. Like, here is your, just regurgitate a tune. Did never work like that. Here's the funny thing. A perfect example of that was Shalandra versus the other black SRT, which I think that car had a build date of like 2 months after my car. Exact same modifications, exact same tune, exact same everything. My car, all of my cars always make the lowest horsepower numbers on the dyno, but are always the quickest at the drag strip. I mean, go figure, right? Anyway, that car made almost like 10 more horsepower than mine with the exact same tune on the exact same day on the exact same dyno. So anyway, so you would have to have them on the dyno, and you really have to go in and make your changes with the cars on the dyno for them to, for the tune to be legit, like to validate that, yes, that car is tuned. It's not just a generic over-the-counter regurgitated canned tune. Every single one of those cars is tuned by Alex on the dyno, and it could be like a bass tune that you would load in, but from there, I mean, and if they were tuned, oh my God, the worst case scenario, guys would go, oh yeah, the car is already tuned. You shouldn't have to do that much work to it. And we're like, you don't understand how it works, dude. Everything goes back to stock. Everything goes back to stock, and we start literally all over from scratch. Oh, God, that was such a, and you would get guys that would actually get offended. And the other funny thing is the guys would get offended that you didn't even consider the tune that they had on the car prior. This is a really funny one, by the way. This guy was a dick. Brings a car into the shop. It was a Hellcat. Not going to say if it was a 2-door, 4-door. Not going to say if it was a SUV or nothing. Okay. But anyway, the guy brings in this Hellcat variant contraption. And I don't know why he was up his tuner's ass so far, but he thought that his tuner's shit apparently did not stink. Well, he had his car tuned and was complaining about some of the drivability issue. I came into this conversation late, okay? I come to this conversation late. The guy goes, well, let's put it on the dyno, see what it makes. Real kind of an arrogant type of a guy. And put the car on the dyno, make the hit. And I'm the one. No, yeah, I'm the one doing the pull. These other two guys are having a conversation. I'm making the pull, and I've got like every red flag going off in this thing. It's running crazy lean. Knock sensors going batshit crazy. No changes, it looked like, were made. Anyway, there was, and we just go, oh, okay, I guess the guy did a good job. So as the data was being pined over, I'm told a thing about what somebody was reading on the data. And I just, shit. Like, look, man, the guy wanted me to make a pull and he was cool with the full pull. That's what I'm going to do. It's the closest I think a car's ever come to blowing up on the dyno. And this is a guy whose car was reportedly making 920 to the rear wheels. It didn't make anywhere near that. I mean, it wasn't even within a correction factor from eddy current to inertia dyno. It wasn't even within that noise. So I guess the point that I'm making here is there's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of discourse when you're talking about guys that are saying, well, this car does that and that car does this, and that's the facts as they know them. A lot of times what we would see is the aftermath of somebody that you almost want to say, you almost want to think they didn't know what they were doing, but that might be an understatement. When cars are sent out into the world without really being validated. Oh, one of the things, by the way, one of the funny things was where the knock sensor voltage was set, it was still pulling. And I even saw it on the pull. I'm like, this thing about to blow up. I didn't know that we ended up doing a read file where the knock sensors were set for it to be pulling any timing would mean that it was really legit, like was knock. So anyway, okay. So that guy and his shit box and another Hellcat are what convinced me that getting a Hellcat was the right car, because if they can survive some of these owners, they'll survive a lot. You're saying Mopar just being Mopar. I'm telling you, it's that nutty. Kev's asking if I mess with any drive-by cable stuff. I have a stock throttle body gutted currently on my Catless 35300 dirt oval car, and on the stock tune, it is very rich and unhappy. Not unless none of the cable stuff, unless it came from the factory with a cable. I haven't done any cable conversions. Red Dog saying driver mod. Amway saying, is the Scat Pack close in power with a Hellcat 7.0? Not even close. No, it's not anywhere near close in power. Like, is it really comparable? And not a chance. It's not even worth talking about the two in the same paragraph. Not when you're talking about outright power. Now, here's the thing. The 392 as a daily, like in and around town kind of car is actually punchier than a stock Hellcat. It's got a bigger engine, more compression ratio, and a more aggressive rear gear. It's got a lot going for it to make it very snappy, just kind of cruising around town, like squirting in around town, surface streets and things like that. The only time the difference between the cars really comes into view is at about half throttle, where the 392 is doing really good in terms of torque production down low. The Hellcat has a smaller engine, significantly less compression ratio. And so it's just kind of lumbering along until you put it into boost. Once you get that thing above 3 or 4 PSI and it's making more power than the 392, you tip into it a little bit more and that car completely changes personalities. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that the car literally is like having multiple cars in one. To give you an idea, the Hellcat on 505 horse mode is a little bit quicker, just a little bit quicker than the 392. It's like a 10th quicker maybe, or about the same speed as a 392 is. And that's when you limit it to 5 pounds of boost. But no, and you got another 5 pounds of boost to go after that minimum. So yeah, no, it's not even close. X is saying, what up, Professor B? What up, X? Sorry, so I'll take a stock scat and leave it where it's at. So, and Chuck Rice saying, my stock scat is plenty of street muscle for me. That kind of brings you back to a point, though, is that so the Hellcat, how can I put this? So a long time ago, I wouldn't say, I had a lot of folks hating on me. A lot of the Hellcat owners hated me because I said, look, the Hellcat is a pointless and useless car to some extent. And I recently did that video, fast versus scary fast. That's a good video to watch if you're into this part of the conversation that we're having, because I go over some of this. And in that video, I'm talking about, look, the Hellcat, my car, stock pulley on 93 octane will accelerate from basically 76 miles an hour to almost 140 miles an hour in the span of about 7 seconds. And that's not in that great of air. That's like in 1,500, 1,800-ish density altitude. That is not in like wow air at all. So in the amount of time that it takes you, and I even think I say this like this in the video, to complete a full thought, just, an innocent, wow, watch this, woo, this is fun, interesting, and whatever, you can easily drive right past your skill set. And it, like on one end, it sounds interesting, neat, fast, romantic, whatever with this level. Believe me when I tell you, playing around with a scat pack on surface streets is more fun because you can actually use all the power that you bought with the scat. You cannot do that with a Hellcat. So something to consider. So I'm saying Black Key versus scat. Actually, RP Productions and I did that at a track rental. And had I not spun, we would have run identical times, 11:40 on that pass. Red Dog saying, I test drove a 6.1 that was built, force pistons, etc., with a Kenny Bell supercharger, dynoed at 695, but it was very sluggish off the line, really late to the party, but when it got going, it was on. Interesting about that. That could have been in the cam, but typically those are going to be pretty rowdy all the time. I'm always asking, how much power would a 707 Cat make without the supercharger? I actually did the calculation on this. It will make basically the same power as an Eagle 5.7 truck motor, so about 400 horsepower, give or take. But that would be considering if it had a fixed intake manifold like the 5.7 intake manifold, if it had that intake manifold on it. So basically it'd be like a bored out 5.7 liter, which it kind of technically is because it has the same stroke as the 5.7 and the same bore as the 6.4. Oh, Red Dog's asking any clue as to why that was, and say maybe answer the question. It might have been in the cam, could be. Kenny Bells are usually pretty violent down low. That's a auto rotor compressor is who they used. Oh, Sovereign's got it posted up. Yeah, the fast versus scary fast video. Yeah, check that out if you're into that part of the conversation, the scat versus the Hellcat. debate, if you will. I don't really hang it so much on the Scat Pack versus Hellcat comparison, but to set it up for you, I mean, that's kind of where that came from. It's like a Mustang 5.0 versus Hellcat, or a Scat Pack versus Hellcat. There's fast, and then there's scary fast, and then there's like all of these cars are like 0 to jail cell pretty fast type of fast. Hell, everything is fast nowadays. Stormy is fast. By the way, I played with the trans tune on Stormy. Bellissimo. Anyway, truck's running good. Pretty good. So just as an aside, if y'all aren't familiar, Stormy is my 2022 Ram 1500, and it's a truck that I had bought as a replacement for a DS Ram work truck, which I absolutely love that truck, but I need to get a new truck. And so I got this. It's an E-Torque 321 geared truck. I bought it as a work truck. Didn't really have a lot of love for it per se. Just, it was going to be a truck. I ended up falling in love with this truck. It's got a Borla S-type exhaust on it. Anyway, love the truck. It's run high 13s at this point. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. Anyway, it was the trucks and the original 5.7 that got me back into Mopar, I should say. Jeremy's saying, it's almost like skill set none by Hellcat, have skill set by RT57. Kind of, sort of. X saying, that's surprising. Yeah, Captain saying I calculated 410 to 420. Yeah, if you pull out, the thing is, it's hard to say, because you have to remember that you're dealing with an intake manifold that only has a runner that's that long with the supercharger. So there's some Kentucky windage and some that you've got some dead reckoning that you have to go with. But based on the cam profile, the compression ratio, which is a full point lower than the 5.7, that's going to pull 3% of the power out of it right there. The displacement bumps you up a little bit. Fixed intake manifold, again, using that same intake manifold would put you, if you're at 410, 420, I'm at 400, 4 something ish. We're all playing in the same ballpark. So it's the same thing. I'm always asking, can you remove the supercharger from a Hellcat and drive it just fine? Absolutely, you can. As long as you got an intake manifold on there, you could. It would run like crap, but you could absolutely do it. Although you'd have a lot of check engine lights, but you could absolutely do it. There's guys that have actually had to drive home with broken belts, broken supercharger belts. Sarnes, 0 to prison, buddy, in no time at all. Absolutely. We'll say it, okay, on the street, 1,000 wheel horsepower is scary fast. Own a red eye, and on the street, it's nothing even close to a high horsepower all-wheel drive. No, it's not. The problem that you have with 1,000 horsepower on the street, I've owned a few, and I've driven a shitload of them. Like every one of them that came through the shop, I had driven. And because I was the guy that did the load testing and load validations on the cars. So, and you would think that would be fun, but when you're doing it, you may as well be wearing, you guys have heard me say this, but I might as well be wearing a white lab coat. Okay. It's neat and exciting the first 10 times, but after a while you're just like, okay, let me do a third gear pull. Yeah. Then you make the third gear pull, make sure the data looks good, make sure everything okay. Fourth gear. Yep. Make sure everything looks cool. And you're more or less freaking out more than anything else that there's something going to be wrong with the car. Something could go wrong mechanically. It did never happen, but you have to load test these things. It's not all that fun when you have a lot of power in just a rear wheel drive car, because you can't just watt the thing on the highway on street tires, even drag radials. It'll light the dang things up. Hell, my car can kind of get sketchy based on air pressure in the rear tires and the surface that I'm on the highway. So you can imagine what something that's making another 150 horsepower, another 200 horsepower over what my car is making, how that can wind up. So, and you drive so many of them that it's just, anyway, long story short, they're not. So my car will do what it can do in the amount of time that it can do it. These faster cars, you start shaving a couple of seconds off of these things. 60 to 130 in like 7 seconds, for example, versus 60 to 130 in 5.5 seconds. And you're hazing the tires for the first half of a second, and you're sketchy about traction up through 110 miles an hour on concrete. That's the world you end up living in. And it's not all that cool. And I say it's not all that cool because the car becomes less than predictable. And the weird thing about it is that you end up collecting real estate at an astonishing rate. I mean, okay, so yeah, it'll run out to 130. Okay, well, I've got to drag this thing out to the top of fifth gear. And in a 309 gear car, that's what, 136. And in a 262 gear car, it's like 150 something. So it's like, this isn't fun anymore. In fact, you quit even looking at that. You're just looking at data. Like, look at the RPM, look at the data, everything cool. I don't even want to know what the numbers look like at that point. So anyway, let's see. Chuck saying it's only cheating to get caught. Yeah, it's I did some kind of interesting things myself. Someone's asking, what's my thought about the Banshee having a 3-speed tranny? It sounds like a crutch. So the Porsche Taycan and the e-tron have 2-speed transmissions. And I didn't know they were going with 3. I thought they were having 2 speeds in those. So the way an electric motor loads up, it makes all of its torque at 0 RPM. So the more you can load an electric motor down low in the RPM range, the more power you can take advantage of. So with the transmission, you can do that, and you can let the motor spin out, let the motor spin up and then load it again. You can definitely do that. Is it neat? I don't know. So here's the thing. I had the idea for this, not like I'm like a genius or something, but you used to see this stuff with guys that would, okay, so back in the day, people think an EV thing is new. Back in the day, guys would get salvaged electric forklifts. And you would take the motor and the battery packs out of the electric forklift, and you would put that into mini trucks. Like you'd see it in Love trucks. You'd see it in like the Nissan hard bodies or a Toyota or something. And they would make this mount, and it would basically bolt. It's a flywheel setup that the clutch, however they did it, you would have the ability to shift gears in the thing. And you kind of had to, because the electric motor didn't make a whole lot of power, but you could go, I think it would start in third, fourth, and fifth, or the 2 gears you could shift into. Fourth and fifth would be useful anyway. And you'd see, I mean, you would hear of these things being able to go 70 miles an hour down the highway, 80 miles an hour, whatever they would do. Anyway, you would do that because the next gear in, you would load it and have the power to get the thing moving. Anyway, again, I don't know how all of that worked. I just remember reading about them, hearing about them. And so having a transmission option would make sense if you're using lower technology electric motors. That's where the Plaid was such a revolutionary setup with the type of motors that it has versus the old S-Type or the e-tron and the Taycan variants. those motors can't spin and still create the amount of power that the Plaid motors can. And that's why a transmission makes sense for them, where the Plaid, it might not. When you load the motor like that, you spike load on the speed controller, which can fry speed controllers too. So anyway, let's see where I lost. Where am I? Here we go. Let's see. Sovereign's hanging out with Wolf. Let's see. I'm always asking. So, what's really faster, a scat or a 5.0 staying? From a dig on the track, a scat. From a roll, the 5.0. Ease. That's an easy one to answer. X is saying 1,000 horsepower. I'd be scared with that thing blowing up on a hard pull. Okay, so to your point, it's fuel quality that's the scary thing for me at that power level. Yeah, I mean, you have to be on E85, even bad-ish, not like terrible, but not the best E85. You still have some playroom in there. Chuck's saying the Banshee has 3 different voltage levels. Right now, it's 340 kilowatts. 440 kilowatts, and then some more to be named later. So 340 kilowatts, add 25% to that, and that's how much horsepower it's making. So like 500 horsepower. 440 kilowatts is like 630, 650 horsepower. Sovereign's talking about, I'm way saying, Scat will walk a 5.0 from a dig, but the 5.0 will walk around the Scat on the big end, which is very true. This is touching a nerve. Catalyst going, do you believe Tim Kaniskas when he says blowing up Hellcat engines to maximum power? And that's horseshit. I mean, okay. So for me, blowing up engines, if that's the case, would you trust any of the calibration engineers to put together a direct connection calibration with a pulley for your Hellcat, Red Eye, or whatever? Like if you're blowing up E85 powered or fueled rather power plants, there is a problem there. We've been making E85 cars really, really fast in the aftermarket for years and years and years. How the hell is it that some egghead that has access to all the engineering might of Stellantis and Dodge and everything else that is wholly to make him power, how is it that you could be blowing up engines with that? I think that is absolute BS. It's fabrication. It's a false flag. And I can tell you that what the problem is, I don't know this for a fact, but I'll be willing to bet dollars and donuts that it is an emissions issue. It's an executive order issue. It is not a calibration, and it is not a hardware issue for those engines. There is no freaking way that it's like that. None. I don't believe it. I don't believe it for as far as I could throw 100 pounds away from me. I don't even believe it that far away from me. Chuck saying the 800 horsepower version is supposed to be the Plaid killer. I don't see that being the case. Like Chuck Sovereign saying, I'd like to see that. I would love to see that. I just don't see it happening. Plaid is on a completely different planet when it comes to being fast. In fact, there's guys running 8s with Plaids. I mean, they're just taking weight out of the thing. And they can run 9s, mid 9s, like 950s, just by pulling up to the tree, staging, yellow, 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 green, punch it, gone. Peace out. Okay, you can put it in launch mode, and you can do all the high ass thing and the cheetah and all that, whatever. Okay, fine. It'll muster up enough to go fast, but just by it, yeah, you lose 3/10 in a 9.5 second car. Gee willikers. Sorry, that'd be a hell of a video. Yeah, that car. Well, we'll see. I'd love to see the car run. Well, I don't Make me a believer. I want to be a believer. That's the thing is I'm coming into this. I'm coming into this wanting to be on board. Hell, I was one of the guys early on that was just gushing over how good EVs can be. And now I'm just like, not really, not feeling it so much anymore. Jeremy's saying, how many people would just walk in and say, I want 1,000 horsepower? Everybody's going, I want it. The problem is everybody, well, there's a lot of people that are buying plaids. And so at least there's those guys that are at least well-heeled enough to be able to pull it off. And that's 1,000 horsepower. I don't know. I mean, at what cost, I guess? Red Dog brings up a good point. You know, what's scary is that there are NASCARs are rated at 670 horsepower. And we have 1,000 horsepower cars with no skilled drivers behind the wheel, which is very true. Jeremy's saying, for me, it was every day. I just roll my eyes because it seemed that it was people who never had a 400 horsepower car or 300 horsepower V8, much less a 400 horsepower. Yeah. Chuck's saying, I would like to drive the Tesla and then the top trim Banshee in the same day just to see the difference. I would be interested to see how Dodge goes about the Banshee. You know, what is the end result of all of this pandering with the Banshee? I'd like to see where that thing ends up. Cat Booze is saying that at the Windsor, Ontario plant that they're going to have the i6, the next gen. Maybe they will. You know, I tell you what, I was saying that the Hurricane coupled with a hybrid transmission would be a force to be reckoned with. Like, it would be obnoxiously fast. So, I mean, if it comes to pass, that would be great. That'd be awesome. Red Dog said, wait, maybe 850. Steven's asking, any chance Chevy makes a V8 big muscle car, they would win the Challenger market? No, not going to happen. And the reason why is you have Chevrolet ditching the V8 entirely and going with what will apparently end up being an all-electric four-door something or another. That's supposed to take the place of the Camaro. Not sure. Red Dog saying, nope, 670. Yeah, I think, is that what 440 kilowatts translates to? Is it 670? Sounds right to me. So I'm saying the Banshee looked good in red. Those wheels make it look even more menacing. The wheels made that car for sure. I'm always saying, so the Hellcat without the supercharger is basically an RT. It's basically, yeah. I mean, it's an RT with just a slightly larger engine going from 5.7 to 6.2. And yeah, sorry, it'd make a little bit more power than the 5.7, but not by leaps and bounds. You're saying more BS from Dodge. There's a lot coming right now. X is saying, I didn't know fuel quality could make or break literally an engine at that power level. Yes, sir. 100%, man. As a matter of fact, it's fuel quality that is your limit to what internal combustion can actually put out. What a lot of folks don't realize is that there are limitations to 93 octane that we've already basically met. Now, those limitations are basically chained to weight of the vehicle, aerodynamic coefficient of drag, in other words, how slippery it is through the air, gearing. Okay, those are three things that can affect the actual load, the physical load on the engine. And it's the load, the cylinder pressure, if you will, that you have to try to quell knock so that you don't blow the engine up. So the higher octane number only means that it doesn't mean that the fuel burns more slowly. That's actually a bit of a wives' tale. But what it does mean is that it has a chemical composition that keeps it from pre-igniting due to compression the way that diesel does. So the problem that you wind up having with 93 octane is that you can only literally make so much power with it before it can no longer support the power that you need it to support. I'll give you an idea. So let's say we have a Hellcat engine, because Hellcat engine is kind of the end of the line for 93 octane technology, if you will. And so let's say you have a Hellcat Red Eye variant, whatever it is, and it's making 800 horsepower. Well, it's making 800 horsepower. You could maybe make 850 or 870 if the car was lighter, maybe 880 or 890 if it were slipperier through the air, but it's not going to ever make more power than that cylinder pressure can than the cylinder pressure that's in that engine. It'll never be able to make more power than that, because E85 can handle it, gasoline cannot. So the idea was, okay, well, let's move things over to ethanol. Well, that became a bit of a problem for obvious reasons, but it's the gasoline that's holding you back. So what would be the option here? Well, the option was what some manufacturers were actually asking for. They were asking for 96 octane, maybe 98 octane. The higher your compression ratio or the more boost you can run, the more efficient the vehicle will be. Better gas mileage, partial throttle efficiency goes up. Everybody's happy. The problem is getting higher octane fuel at the pump. Now we're back to square one. Here we go again. See what I mean? So it's really that you're at the limit of what 91 really, or 93 octane can manage from a cylinder pressure and load point of view, which is why hybrids start to look really good. Not only do they add power, but they can potentially be removing some of the load, or they are removing some of that load from the internal combustion engine. It's kind of like a win-win in that case. So anyway, but yeah, 100% can make a big difference. Chuck saying the Banshee still looks better than the Plaid. Yes, it does. But I think the Plaid is still a top dog. We'll see. We will have to see. Darren saying, thanks again. Love the advice. Got to bounce. Man, thank you for hanging out, Darren. Appreciate it. Chuck saying you can get stage upgrades for the Banshee. Yes, sir, you can. Absolutely. Jeremy saying he feels like Dodge's just throwing shit at the wall and hope that something sticks. You do kind of get that feeling a little bit. Captain Boo's loving the bigs and littles. Oh, Steven's saying Dodge or Chevy don't make a large muscle car. Ford could offer a classic package for the Stang, like an S197. I think it'd be more, I don't know. They do have the Bronco. I don't think they're going to do anything with that Mustang. It is going to be a huge hit with the S650. That new Mustang is going to be pretty nasty. He's saying H-Town. I like it. Cal said, what do you think of the roadkill nights and the Hellcat challenge? That's what I think about that. I'm not going to get into that. He's saying, thank you for the fuel quality lesson. Absolutely. But yeah, fuel quality is a huge thing. In fact, that is the one thing that is the big limit to how you can tune these cars. You just can't throw timing at them. You have to actually do a lot of data logging. This is the other side of it too. E85, gasoline, doesn't matter what kind of fuel you're running. You have to data log to make sure you're staying on top of fuel quality, and don't let the fuel rot in the tank. That's the other side of it. Sam's in saying, Subby, what are your thoughts on the new truck motor options? If we're talking about there's a lot of different trucks and a lot of different engines. I think my position with the Fords is pretty well known. I would love a 5-liter, but I couldn't option the truck that I wanted with a 373 gear, which is absolute bullshit. Anyway, I couldn't option it with the right gear. Plus, I didn't want to have a potential issue with the 10-speed or the cracking or the leaks that they run into. So, Sam saying the Hurricane versus 5.7 versus 6.7. Don't really have a dog in the fight for the diesels. Don't do much for me. The Hurricane versus the 5.7, we'll have to see. I mean, I don't really know that I like having 22 pounds of boost in a 6-cylinder gas motor when you have the EcoBoost making 15 and guys that tune them get sketchy with those things after 22 pounds. I don't know. Then you get the 500 horse version, which is 26. I don't know. I know that they're built to handle it, and I know that you can engineer qualities into any engine. So in terms of durability, I'm cool with all of that. We'll just have to see how they hold up. Nobody has any history on them yet. So the 5.7 I love, and it would be a shame if that engine goes away. But when it does, I'm hoping that the Hurricanes will be there to do a good job with them. Chuck saying Meekum, a new Bronco with the Raptor package sold for $130K. Golly, that's bananas crazy. Red Dog, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Appreciate the contribution. Saying thanks for the knowledge, man. Thank you very much for the support. Steven saying the larger classic looking car in V8 has a huge market. You would think someone would fill the gap if there is no Challenger. Eventually, I'm sure we'll get something. Well, here's the problem. It's kind of a market, but the issue is that there's a lot more people buying SUVs, and the hot rod side of things is steady, but it's not growing. So I've always thought, though, that something like a Galaxy, something like a Chevelle, something like a Super Bee or a Roadrunner would have been really cool. Like something like that would have been neat. But again, the other side to this argument is those are neat and nostalgic for folks that are in the know and are of a certain age. The kids kind of need their own look and their own style now too. So, X is saying, would you only change your oil pump if the car has trouble holding pressure, or can it be based on how many miles you have on the car? I would only have to mess with it if it has any issues with pressure. You have to remember, we have trucks in the fleet that have 300,000 miles on them. These are all Ram DS trucks that have perfect fuel pressure. Oil pressure, no issues with that whatsoever. So, I would say that, unless you start running into it, the thing is it would be really hard for an oil pump to go bad just because there's really not any moving parts to it other than the rotor, and that's it. It would only be if the case itself had an issue or if the rotor broke, which nobody's ever had with these things. Let's see. Oh, Jeremy said, I still think Dodge should have gone with a 5.7 e-torque performance version. I'd like to see them if they could do something with that thing to actually have it be a power adder. On the Charger platform, it could. I don't know. Now, it could be a neat thing. I just don't know. I know that with my truck, it's an e-torque truck, and it doesn't really add power, but it does help to mitigate parasitic loss. So there's that, but it'd be neat if they could figure out a way to make it a power adder. I just don't have access to it in the tune. It's a body control module thing. X saying, cool, thanks, you bet. Really saying, what are your thoughts on the Black Ghost? It's a sticker package on a factory car. If you're talking about the original car, it's Hemi Challenger. Cool car. But if we're talking about the latest, the last call version, all of them are, it's a beautiful car. It's an awesome car, but there's nothing added to it from a performance standpoint. So if I get a black wide body Challenger and I get some aftermarket stickers for it, then I might have my own Black Ghost. So, so I'm saying, I wonder what witchcraft they pull to get 22 PSI reliable on the Hurricane. But then again, I come from the world of iron block diesel where 26 to 35 isn't unheard of stock. Well, I mean, 22 is one thing, but the HO version is 26. Now you have to run premium in that, but you can run 87 in the 22 PSI, the standard output, with 89 being recommended. I'm always asking, what about the 707 Hellcat and Demon? Is there a big difference between them or no? Define big. So yes, there is. The 707 versus the Demon, which is also the Red Eye engine, same engine. Different pistons, different camshaft, different supercharger, but we'll take the supercharger out of the equation just for like short block talk. The thing is that the Hellcat, the 707, is extremely durable. So is the Red Eye better? Technically, yeah. And technically it's really good. I mean, it's, yes, better, but way better. I've seen the Hellcats go through hell and come out the other side, not even realizing that they had a problem in front of them. Seen the same happen with Red Eyes. So yeah, they're way better, but I wouldn't trade a Hellcat in on a Red Eye just to get those internals. It's not that way better. Jeremy's asking, I was thinking on the EPA side to replace 392 and still make 45, 470 power levels. For the other ones. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's, you're still going to have the HO option, which is 500 horsepower and 520 pound-feet of torque. If that ends up going into a new car platform, we'll see. I'd be kind of cool if they would announce something. I was hoping that that's what we were going to see pop up at SEMA, and much to my, color me not surprised that that's not what ended up happening. So, but anyway, guys, with that, I got to wrap it up. We're coming up on 2 hours. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for hanging out with me. Would not do this without you. Love each and every one of you guys. Could not do this without the support you guys give. Man, it really helps me out a ton. Love having you guys on. But get out there and do something cool for somebody, guys. Chances are they need it way more than you know. And with that, that's a wrap. Listen, y'all have a great week, and we will catch y'all on the next one. Ayos.